The boy said nothing in class, until he stood up and said this about his mother. He was the kind of kid you could miss if you weren't paying attention. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe if you love meaningful stories, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I really enjoy seeing where these stories travel. Every classroom has one. The quiet one in the back. No trouble, no noise, no raised hand. Just there. That was Liam. He sat in the last seat of the third row, near the window. Not because he liked the view, but because that's where the teacher placed him. His backpack was always zipped, his notebook opened neatly, his pencil sharpened down to a stub. He didn't fidget. He didn't doodle. He just listened. Or at least it seemed like he did. He rarely made eye contact. When called on, he'd speak softly, just enough to answer the question. Never volunteered. Never interrupted. Never laughed too loud, even when the other kids lost it over something silly. The teacher, Mrs. Carson, noticed him in the way teachers do. Not because he stood out, but because he didn't. At first, she thought he might just be shy. Some kids are. She figured he'd come out of his shell eventually. But weeks passed, then months. And still, Liam kept to himself. He didn't join group conversations. He didn't play during recess. He always sat with the same small sandwich during lunch. Never traded, never talked, just watched. He wasn't unfriendly, just quiet. There was nothing wrong on paper. His grades were steady. His attendance was perfect. His work was turned in on time. He didn't act out. He didn't withdraw either. He just existed in the space between present and invisible. Mrs. Carson started paying closer attention. She noticed how he flinched when the bell rang unexpectedly. How he always checked his desk twice before leaving. How he never asked for help, even when he clearly needed it. He'd sit with his head slightly lowered, his fingers tracing the edge of his paper like it helped him think. The other kids didn't tease him. They didn't include him either. They just accepted that Liam didn't talk much, and after a while, they stopped trying to make him. At staff meetings, his name rarely came up. No behavior issues, no academic concerns, no red flags. Just quiet. Always quiet. But silence isn't emptiness. And one day Mrs. Carson found herself wondering what Liam's story was. Because kids don't stay quiet for no reason. There's always something behind it. Sometimes fear, sometimes habit, sometimes something deeper. She hadn't met his parents yet. No one showed up for orientation, no emails, no phone calls. Just the standard emergency contact form, filled out in blue ink. Under parent guardian, only one name. Angela Martinez, mother. No father listed, no second contact. That didn't tell her much, but it told her enough to know someone somewhere was working hard to keep this kid afloat. She started noticing the little things. His shoes were clean, but worn. His shirts were always washed, but often the same 2 or 3 on rotation. His backpack zipper was mended with red thread. Someone was paying attention. Someone was trying. One morning, Liam came in with a book tucked under his arm. Not a school book. Something old, with the cover peeling at the edges. He read it during free time. Eyes fixed. Focused. Mrs. Carson walked past and glanced down. It was a library copy, stamped with a due date 3 weeks away. He ran his finger along the lines as he read. She didn't interrupt. Because something told her he was carrying more than just a book. And that one day, if she waited long enough, he might let go of some of it. But for now, he said nothing. And no one, not even her, could have predicted what he'd eventually say when he finally stood up. The first time she met his mother, it was already dark outside. Parent-teacher night had mostly wrapped up. The last of the families were filing out, voices fading down the hallway. Most of the desks were empty, chairs still pushed back from earlier conversations. Mrs. Carson was stacking handouts into neat piles when she heard the soft knock at the door. Angela Martinez stood in the doorway, holding her purse with both hands, her coat pulled tight around her. She looked like she'd rushed to get there, hair pulled back loosely, one pant leg slightly damp from the rain. "Hi, I'm Liam's mom," she said. Mrs. Carson smiled and motioned for her to come in. "Of course. I'm so glad you made it." Angela stepped into the room and glanced around, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to be there. She took the seat closest to the teacher's desk and folded her hands in her lap. Mrs. Carson started with the usual: grades, homework, class participation. She tried to keep it balanced, but there wasn't much to critique. Liam was quiet, respectful, stayed on task. "Is he doing okay?" Angela asked after a moment. Her voice was soft but direct. "Like, socially?" Mrs. Carson paused. She appreciated the honesty. Not all parents asked the real questions. "He's quiet," she said carefully. "But he's steady. He listens. He follows directions. He keeps to himself, but he's never disruptive. It's more like he's careful, like he's always watching to see what kind of day it's going to be." Angela nodded. She didn't look surprised. "He's been through a lot," she said, after a long pause. "We've both been through a lot." She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. The words hung there, filling in the blanks without details. Mrs. Carson waited, just in case she wanted to say more. But Angela just smiled, the kind that tried to look strong even when it wasn't. "I just want him to have a normal year," she said. "No drama, no attention, just a year where he can breathe." Mrs. Carson nodded. "He's safe here. You can trust that." Angela exhaled through her nose like she'd been holding something in. She stood up, adjusted the strap on her purse, and glanced around the room again. "Sorry I came so late," she said. "I work nights. I had to switch shifts to be here." "Thank you for making the time," Mrs. Carson said. "It matters." Angela offered a faint smile and turned toward the door. Just before she left, she paused. "He's a good boy," she said. "He just carries a lot." Mrs. Carson didn't forget that. After she left, the classroom felt different. It was the same four walls, same posters, same desks. But now there was a little more weight to the quiet space Liam always sat in. It wasn't just a quiet student anymore. It was a boy doing his best under circumstances he didn't choose. A boy being raised by a woman who didn't talk about her struggles, but wore them in the way she held her shoulders. Mrs. Carson started watching Liam more closely after that, not with pity, with intention. She noticed how he always scanned the room when he came in, how he never rushed, how he made sure his chair didn't scrape the floor too loudly, how he double-checked his name on his paper before turning it in, like it mattered that it looked right. She started to understand. His quiet wasn't distance. It was control. He didn't take up space unless he had to. Didn't make waves. Didn't interrupt. Because somewhere along the way, Liam had learned that silence was safer. And that silence was starting to tell her more than words ever could. It started with small things. Most teachers miss them, especially early in the year when everything's moving fast. But once you know to look, it's impossible to unsee. Liam never rushed. That was the first thing Mrs. Carson noticed. When the other kids burst into the room in the morning, laughing, tossing backpacks, jostling for the best seat, he walked, always at the same pace, always calm, like noise made him tired. His desk was always organized. No clutter, no torn edges on his papers, No broken crayons or lost caps on markers. He never asked to borrow anything. Not once. If he didn't have something, he found a way to make do without calling attention to it. His clothes were clean, though clearly worn. The same navy sweatshirt 3 days in a row. Faded jeans with the hem a little frayed. But he was never sloppy. There was care in the way he wore everything, like someone had taught him that being neat mattered. When he ate lunch, he opened the sandwich carefully, unwrapping it in slow motions. One apple, always sliced. A napkin folded in half. Never traded. Never asked for more. He ate what he had. Grateful. Silent. Sometimes he'd read during recess. Not always. Some days he'd just sit on the bench near the fence, watching the other kids run and shout. Not with longing, more like someone who'd made peace with being on the edge of the action. And he never complained. Mrs. Carson started to see the patterns. Liam didn't draw attention because attention, in his world, probably came with risk. It was better to be quiet, better to be unnoticed, better to blend in. But his silence wasn't empty. She could see it in how quickly he picked up on instructions, how he remembered details no one else did, how he noticed when someone dropped a pencil and returned it before they even realized it was missing. One day, after a science lesson, she overheard him whispering to a classmate who had gotten confused about the experiment. "You added too much vinegar," Liam said, barely above a whisper. "It should have been 1 tablespoon. The boy looked at him, startled. "How'd you know?" Liam just shrugged and went back to wiping down his workspace. He knew because he was always paying attention. Mrs. Carson started leaving quiet encouragement on his papers. Simple things like, "You're doing great," or "I see your effort." She didn't expect a reaction, but one day, after she handed back an assignment, she noticed a tiny smile flicker across his face before he tucked the paper into his folder. That was enough. She never pushed him to speak more. She just made room in case he ever wanted to. When the class started a new writing unit, she gave them a prompt. Write about someone you admire. Most kids jumped in right away. Stories about athletes, movie characters, older siblings, a few about parents. Liam just stared at the page. Mrs. Carson passed by his desk later and saw nothing but his name written at the top. No first sentence, no outline, not even a single word. She didn't say anything. Because now, she understood that silence from Liam wasn't a lack of thought. It was weight. Something he was carrying that he wasn't ready to put down yet. And she didn't know what it was. But she knew it mattered. Because sometimes the quietest kids are holding the loudest truths, and sooner or later, they find a way to say them. It was the kind of assignment most kids didn't overthink. The prompt was simple. Write about someone you admire. A real person. Someone in your life. Someone who's made a difference. Pencils hit paper fast. One student immediately started writing about her grandpa who used to be in the Navy. Another about her older brother who plays basketball. A few asked if they could write about a celebrity. Mrs. Carson reminded them gently, "Someone you know." Liam sat still. He didn't raise his hand, didn't start writing. He didn't even pick up his pencil. Mrs. Carson noticed from across the room but didn't approach him right away. Sometimes kids just needed a minute to get started. But 5 minutes passed, then 10. The page in front of him stayed blank. He wasn't distracted. He wasn't staring out the window or playing with his pencil or sneaking looks at other kids' papers. He was just sitting there, eyes fixed on the top of the page, like he was trying to will something out of himself that wouldn't come. After the activity, as the students lined up for music, Mrs. Carson stopped next to Liam's desk. "Having a hard time getting started?" she asked quietly. He gave a small nod. "Do you know who you want to write about?" she asked. Another small nod. She smiled gently. Then that's a good place to begin. You don't have to make it perfect. Just write what's true. He looked up at her for half a second, just long enough to let her know he'd heard, but didn't say anything. The next day, the class had another writing period. She gave them time to finish their drafts. The students around him were comparing pages, showing off funny lines, arguing over who had the best opening sentence. Liam just sat with his pencil in hand, tapping it lightly against his knee. Still no words on the page. She walked by again. Still no pressure. Still no questions. But she saw it in his posture. He wanted to write. He just couldn't bring himself to start. It wasn't laziness. It wasn't avoidance. It was something deeper. That afternoon, Mrs. Carson made a quiet note in her planner. Check in with Liam. Don't push. Just wait. She knew enough by now to know this wasn't about writing. This was about saying something. About naming something that maybe he wasn't used to putting into words. On Thursday, the kids were told they'd be presenting their writing in front of the class next week. Nothing fancy. Just reading it out loud from their desks. Groans all around. A few cheers. Some kids thrived in front of an audience. Some didn't. Liam didn't react. He just stared straight ahead. On Friday, when it was time to collect drafts, he handed in a blank paper again. Mrs. Carson looked at it, then at him. He didn't explain. Didn't apologize. Just returned to his seat like nothing was wrong. She didn't mark it incomplete. Instead, she slipped a sticky note on top of the paper before returning it Monday morning. Whenever you're ready, no rush. She didn't expect a miracle, but she wanted him to know she saw him, that his silence didn't make him invisible. That night she found herself thinking about him more than usual, not because of the assignment, but because she could feel it. He had something to say, and whatever it was, it mattered. By Wednesday, everyone had turned in their papers, except Liam. The stack of essays sat on Mrs. Carson's desk, organized neatly with paper clips and sticky notes. Some were polished. Some were messy. Some were full of heart, and some were clearly rushed at the last minute. That was normal. What wasn't normal was a student turning in nothing 3 days in a row. But with Liam, it didn't feel like defiance. It felt like hesitation, like something was caught between his head and his hands and wouldn't let go. When she passed out the schedule for presentations, she made sure not to assign him a specific day. The paper read, Liam, TBD. No one noticed. By now, most of the class had accepted that Liam didn't speak much. Some of the kids were even a little protective of him. If someone asked why he never said anything, another would shrug and say, he just doesn't. It wasn't unkind. It was just what it was. But Mrs. Carson couldn't stop thinking about him. He wasn't just a quiet kid anymore. He was a quiet kid holding something. Thursday came. Still nothing. She called the class to the rug after recess and began reading some of the essays out loud, with permission. One was about a big sister who taught her younger brother how to swim. Another was about a father who worked 2 jobs and still made it to every baseball game. The room got quiet when she read those. Not every student could relate, but they listened. Really listened. Liam sat cross-legged at the edge of the group, hands clasped together, staring at the floor. She watched his expression carefully. No eye rolls, no slouching, just stillness. The kind of stillness that meant he wasn't bored. He was absorbing every word. Later, she gave the class some free writing time. Liam pulled out a blank sheet of notebook paper but didn't write on it. Instead, he folded it in half, then in half again. He kept folding it until it was a small square, then unfolded it completely and smoothed it flat. It was a small thing. Most teachers wouldn't have noticed. But Mrs. Carson did. He was thinking. That night, as she graded essays at her kitchen table, She pulled out the blank one Liam had handed in days earlier. The sticky note was still attached. "Whenever you're ready, no rush." She left it on her desk for the next morning. No pressure, but still waiting. Friday rolled around. 4 students read their essays aloud. Some stumbled, some rushed. A few surprised her. One made the class laugh. One made another student cry. At the end of the period, Liam was the only one left who hadn't presented. Mrs. Carson didn't say anything. As the bell rang, the students filed out for lunch. Liam was the last one to leave. He paused at the door, glanced over his shoulder, and then looked away quickly. Still nothing. But something in the way he moved told her the words weren't gone. They were just waiting. Waiting for the right moment. Waiting for him to feel safe enough to say them. And she would wait as long as it took. It happened on a Tuesday, the last day of presentations. The deadline had come and gone, but Mrs. Carson wasn't watching the clock. She had stopped expecting Liam to participate, not because she didn't believe in him, but because she knew forcing it would break whatever fragile trust had started to grow between them. That morning, the classroom buzzed with energy. Kids were passing around their final essays, rereading favorite lines, teasing each other about nervous voices or dramatic pauses. Everyone had gone. Every student had taken their turn, all except one. Liam sat in his usual spot. 3rd row, last seat by the window. His desk was clear. His hands were folded. His eyes on the floor. Mrs. Carson wrapped up the final presentation. She stood in front of the whiteboard, the period nearly over. She was about to thank the class when she saw movement in her peripheral vision. Liam was standing up. No one said anything at first. He didn't raise his hand, didn't speak, just stood, slowly, carefully, like every muscle had to decide first. The room went quiet. Mrs. Carson paused, gave him space. Liam took something out of his backpack, a single sheet of wide-ruled notebook paper, folded once down the middle. No cover, no title. He walked to the front of the room and stopped. Kids turned in their chairs. Some whispered. Mrs. Carson said nothing. She simply stepped to the side. Liam opened the paper with both hands. His fingers trembled slightly. He cleared his throat once, and then he started to read. His voice was low, uncertain, but steady. "I admire my mom," he said, "because she does everything." No one moved. "She works at night so she can be home in the mornings. She doesn't sleep a lot. She makes me lunch even when she's tired. And when I get home from school, she acts like she's not tired, even though I know she is." He paused, looked down, then kept going. "She never complains. She just keeps going. She says stuff like, 'We're okay,' even when I know things are hard. She doesn't know that I hear her crying sometimes when she thinks I'm asleep." The room was still. Not even the clock ticking above the whiteboard felt loud enough to cut the silence. "I used to get scared that I was the reason things were hard," he said. "But now I know she's doing all of this for me, not because of me." Mrs. Carson felt something catch in her chest. Liam looked at the paper again. His voice was stronger now. "She never asks for help. She doesn't want people to know we don't have much. She makes it look easy, even when it's not." He swallowed. "I don't tell her thank you. Not enough. But if I ever do something right in my life, it'll be because of her." That was the end. He folded the paper once, held it in both hands. No one clapped. No one laughed. No one moved. It wasn't that kind of moment. Mrs. Carson stepped forward, just close enough for him to see she was there. "Thank you, Liam," she said softly. "You didn't have to share that, but I'm really glad you did." He gave a small nod and walked back to his seat. As he sat down, something changed. The room didn't go back to how it was before. The silence wasn't the same. Because now, when the class looked at Liam, they didn't see the quiet kid in the back anymore. They saw someone who had something to say, and finally found the strength to say it. No one looked at Liam the same way after that. Not in a dramatic spotlight kind of way. He didn't become suddenly popular. He didn't start leading group projects or cracking jokes at lunch. He was still quiet, still sat in the same seat, still walked with his head down and zipped his backpack with the same careful motion. But something shifted. It was in how the other kids gave him space. Not the kind that pushes people out, but the kind that lets them in at their own pace. When someone needed a partner for a science activity, they asked Liam without hesitation. Not because they felt sorry for him, because now they saw him. One morning, a boy from the row in front of him turned around before class started and slid a small pack of markers across his desk. "You can use these if you want. Mine don't squeak." Liam just nodded, but he accepted them. During recess, instead of sitting alone on the bench, he was invited into a quiet corner of the soccer game, just to watch, if he wanted. And once, he passed the ball back when it rolled his way. No one made a big deal out of it. That was the beauty of it. Nothing was forced. No one asked him to be different. They just stopped pretending he wasn't there. Mrs. Carson saw it too. He answered 2 questions that week. Out loud. Once in math, once in reading. Not anything long, but enough. When she handed back his essay, creased from being folded, the writing a little uneven, he looked at her, just for a second, and said, "Thanks." 1 word. But for Liam, it might as well have been 10. Later that week, she posted a few essays on the classroom wall. With permission. She asked Liam if he wanted his included. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Only if you don't put my name on it." She agreed. He watched her pin it up next to the others, right in the middle of the board. He stood back and looked at it for a long time. That afternoon, as the kids packed up to go home, a girl stopped in front of the board. She read the anonymous essay from start to finish. Then she turned to Liam and said, "That was about your mom, wasn't it?" He looked at her, unsure how to respond. "She sounds really strong," the girl said. Kind of like a superhero." Liam didn't say anything, but his hand tightened slightly around the strap of his backpack. When the dismissal bell rang, he left the room quietly, same as always. But now, every step he took felt different, because the words he'd been holding in had finally found a place to land. And for the first time, he wasn't just the quiet kid at the back of the room. He was a voice that had been heard. Mrs. Carson didn't forget the way the room had gone quiet when Liam read his essay. Not the kind of quiet that came from boredom or distraction. It was the kind that came when something real hits people in a place they didn't expect. That silence stuck with her. The next day, she found herself pulling Liam's essay out of the drawer again. It wasn't long, barely a few paragraphs. But every sentence was sharp, honest, and without decoration. It didn't try to sound deep. It just was. She read it slowly, then folded it again and placed it back where she'd found it. There was something about the way he spoke when he read it. Steady, soft, but certain. Like he'd carried those words around for years and just needed someone to listen. Not react, not clap, just hear it. That's what the class had done. No one teased him. No one whispered behind his back the next day. The usual awkwardness that followed classroom presentations never showed up. Instead, the kids just gave him space. Respect without being told to. Mrs. Carson saw how they treated him differently now. How they held the door when they didn't used to. How they asked him short, simple questions, like if he'd read a certain book, or what he thought of a math problem. He didn't always answer, but he listened, and he knew he was being included. One morning during silent reading, a boy slid his chair a little closer to Liam's desk, holding up a graphic novel. "This is kind of funny, if you want to see it," he said. Liam took the book without a word, read 2 pages, then passed it back with the faintest nod. It was the kind of exchange most people wouldn't even notice. But Mrs. Carson did. She also noticed how Liam started showing up early. Just a few minutes. Just enough to walk in before the first bell. Enough to settle in without the rush of the hallway. One morning, he brought a book from home. It was an old paperback, worn along the spine. He kept it in his lap during read aloud and didn't open it until the teacher started speaking. He turned the pages carefully, listened without looking up. At recess, he still stayed near the edge of the group. But now, when the kids talked, they sometimes turned their heads just enough to include him, even if he didn't say anything back. He was still quiet, still guarded. But he wasn't alone anymore. And the biggest change wasn't just in how the other kids saw him. It was how he started seeing himself. One afternoon, after dismissal, Mrs. Carson was erasing the whiteboard when she noticed something written in the corner in faint pencil. "She keeps going, even when it's hard." It was a quote from his essay. Not signed. No one saw who wrote it. But she knew. She left it there for the rest of the week. Because that line wasn't just about his mom. It was about him too. A quiet boy in a loud world, learning that being seen doesn't always mean making noise. Sometimes it just means being brave enough to speak once, and realizing that was enough. Liam never told his mom what he said that day. He came home like he always did. Same shoes, same backpack, same quiet way of opening the front door so it didn't squeak. She was on the couch, half asleep, the TV playing low in the background. Her work uniform still on, shoes kicked off by the door. He walked past her, dropped his bag, and sat down at the small kitchen table to start his homework. Just like always. She stirred a little and called out, "Hey, baby, good day?" He answered like he always did. Yeah, that was it. He didn't tell her how he stood up in front of the whole class, how his voice shook a little, but he kept going. How he told everyone what kind of person she was, what she did when no one was watching, what she gave up, what she meant to him. He didn't tell her that the room went still when he spoke, that no one looked away, that even his teacher had to pause and take a breath before thanking him. He didn't say any of that, because Liam didn't need applause. He just needed to say it out loud once, and he had. So instead, he finished his homework, washed his plate after dinner, folded a blanket she left on the arm of the couch. Quiet love, just like hers. His mom never asked if he'd turned in the assignment. She didn't check his backpack. She just kept doing what she always did. Work, cook, clean, try. And the next morning she packed his lunch with the same sandwich, same folded napkin, no note, just the way he liked it. But he slipped something into her bag that day. A sticky note, tucked inside the folded edge of the grocery list she kept in her purse. It said, "You don't know what you've done for me, but I do." She never brought it up. But the next time she made his sandwich, there was a slice of apple in the bag, dipped in cinnamon sugar, his favorite. No words, just the gesture. That was how they spoke. Mrs. Carson never shared Liam's story with anyone outside the classroom. But years later, she kept that moment filed in her memory like it was made of glass. Untouched, clear, unshakable. She would go on to teach hundreds of students, some loud, some difficult, some easy to praise. But whenever a quiet one walked through the door, head down, voice low, she would remember Liam, and she would wait. Because the ones who say the least sometimes carry the most. And when they speak, If you're listening, it can change the room. Even if the person they're speaking for never hears it. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy meaningful stories like this, we'd love to have you as a subscriber.